Welcome to the Black Father's Pulse, the podcast where fatherhood meets purpose. I'm Dr. Alvin Thomas, clinical psychologist and professor, here to guide you through the multifaceted journey of Black fatherhood. Please note, the views expressed here are my own and not those of my employer. But get ready to dive into the dynamic world of Black fatherhood, where we celebrate the highs, tackle the lows, and share plenty of laughs along the way. Let's keep the pulse of fatherhood beating strong and vibrant. Black fathers face unique challenges at the intersection of racial identity, parenthood, and professional life, and that can significantly impact their mental health. Despite making up approximately 13% of the U.S. workforce, Black men report higher levels of workplace stress, with studies showing that they are 28% more likely than their white counterparts to experience work-related anxiety. The compounding pressures of systemic racism, professional expectations, and the responsibilities of fatherhood create a mental health burden that remains largely unaddressed in professional settings. This conversation is not only timely, but essential for creating workplaces where Black fathers can thrive both professionally and personally. Today, I am honored to welcome Dr. Ryan Warner to the Black Father's Pulse podcast. As an award-winning consulting psychologist, Dr. Warner has transformed organizations worldwide by integrating inclusion with mental health strategy. Having trained over 12,000 professionals across Fortune 500 companies, the United Nations, and government agencies, Dr. Warner brings a unique perspective on how workplace environments impact our well-being. Dr. Warner's work is particularly relevant to our current conversation as he has uncovered the powerful connection between feeling valued at work and mental health, a crucial insight when half of all employees report not feeling valued and about 87% of organizations struggle without effective inclusion practices. Dr. Warner joins us today to share his expertise on a topic that affects many in our audience, navigating the complex terrain of Black fatherhood and mental health in professional settings. Dr. Warner, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Thomas.
There's a statistic that suggests Black men are about 20% more likely to experience serious psychological distress compared to white men. 60% are less likely to receive mental health treatment. Before we dive into your research, I want to hear about your own personal experience of balancing fatherhood and professional life as a Black man.
When I think of work-life balance, I ultimately recognize that sometimes it's going to be challenging for us to have 50% home life, 50% work life. So I like to think about it like work-life harmony. How do I harmonize or integrate my various identities that's important to me so I can thrive both personally and professionally?
Thanks for that. Dr. Warner, was there a moment when you realized that this intersection created unique challenges for Black fathers?
Yes, interesting because as a background, I have 3 children under the age of 4. And there was no manual when I took my first child home from the hospital. There's no manual of how to, be a great father.
Right.
I just thought about the people I look up to in my life. And I thought about, hey, well, I need to be present, need to ensure that I'm mostly supporting my children as well, right? And then when you go to work, you think about the challenges as a Black man you may face, right? So I've experienced a lot of microaggressions, overt and covert forms of discrimination in my personal and professional life. So as a Black man as well, there's a stigma of, Black men are not in the household, they're not present. And I want to ensure that I did the opposite. I want to ensure that I was providing and protecting for my family and being emotionally present and being able to provide that type of support. So the challenges that I've seen is, number one, just navigating this challenge of being a parent and parenting multiple children, right, with the support of my great wife, and going into the workplace and trying to navigate those systemic barriers that arise as well. So I feel like I'm still navigating. I'm still on this journey right now. But I found to be most helpful is finding mentors, being able to check in with myself as well and just ask myself continuously, hey, am I doing everything both in my personal life and professional life to reach my optimal potential? And work for me is easy,
Mm.
but parenting, that's the biggest challenge. That's the hardest job I have right now. So every day is a new day. But I look at that as work-life integration, right?
Right.
Life harmony versus work-life balance. And if I could continue to be intentional
Right.
regarding me being able to thrive as a father, then I know I'm going to thrive in my professional life as well.
So when you look at the research, I know it has examined some really unique stresses and pressures for Black fathers in professional environments. Could you share some key findings that highlight how these experiences differ for other demographic groups?
Yeah. So when you look at all of the systemic barriers, right, systemic racism and just other challenges, we know that Black men in leadership, they may experience additional challenges when it comes to microaggressions, right, when it comes to imposter syndrome, et cetera. And you think about the challenges just navigating in society, right? I know for me, when I go into society, I live in Houston, Texas area.
Hmm.
No one would assume that I have a PhD, right?
Right.
Like I have tattoos all on my arm. I'm 6'4", right? And we think about how Black men are typically looked at as criminals. They're looked
Mm.
at as intimidated based on all the literature to support this, right? And so I have to navigate, getting those different stares from others, right? And then go into the workplace and ask myself, hey, am I meant to be here, right?
Mm.
Um, so you look at those psychological impacts, self doubt, some additional anxiety. And then you go back into the home and you have to navigate all those other normal challenges of being a parent, right? Being able to juggle work and home life, being able to manage tantrums when they come up, right?
Mm.
Being able to ask yourself, am I instilling the right values within my children, right? So you look at those compiled levels of different stressors, and it may be very unique for the Black man. We also know that Black men really don't seek mental health treatment at the same rate as other populations and groups. That may be due to toxic masculinity, maybe due to the fact that there's not a lot of providers of color. Well, and historically, Black men have not felt valued or felt that they belong within the healthcare system, right?
Mm.
So it may be hard to find another Black male that you can relate to when you try to find a psychologist.
Mm.
There's only 1% of Black male psychologists with a doctorate degree, right? And I happen to be one of that 1%, right? And I look around, even when I want to try to seek professional support and help, I have a difficult time finding people who I can relate to, right? So that in turn may prohibit individuals from seeking that support that they need, and they may internalize a lot of those emotions and challenges.
Thanks for that. So you've mentioned the challenge of straddling those two spaces, the workspace, the home space. I'm trying to think of Dr. Warner at work, Black father, Black man, and then Dr. Warner becoming Ryan, walking into his home with his kids.
Hmm.
Is there a ritual or some kind of practice that you engage in to help yourself transition from one space to the other? And if you could walk us through what that looks like.
So Dr. Warner at work is probably very serious
Mm.
and task oriented. But then when I go into the home life, I think naturally that soft side just comes out of me. I have
Mm.
two daughters, twin daughters, who are 11 months. And naturally they just pull at my heart
Mhm.
and they bring that soft side. If you see me interacting with my daughters, I give them like 100 kisses per
Mm.
minute, and I think that in turn brings more the funny side, the relaxing side, and the less serious side of me comes out in the home life. I'm a little bit, more relaxed, if things aren't cleaned up or things aren't perfect in my environment, I'm okay with that. Versus at work, I have to ensure that my office is always straightened up. I have to ensure that I'm completing all my tasks on time. So I think naturally having young children, that just brings that out of me. I don't think I make a conscious switch at all psychologically, but I try to also bring that side of me at work as well. So I have various employees who work for my consulting company, and there are times when we're building rapport, I have to take some time to get to know them, to relax a little bit, to engage in small talk, to tell jokes and have fun. And I think that balance helps me be successful both in my personal life and my professional life.
Okay, thanks. Let's talk a little bit about code switching. So you're talking
Mm.
about bringing some of that home life into the workspace, bringing some of that persona into the home space. But what does this code switching looks like, and what people sometimes refer to as that emotional labor that many Black fathers experience at work?
Yeah.
How does this constant navigation between personal and work impact mental health? I know W.E. Du Bois talked about that double consciousness, that challenge of straddling two worlds. How does that affect mental health for Black men?
Yes. So research shows that can contribute to additional anxiety, could contribute to additional self-doubt, racing thoughts, sleep issues. I can recall a time in my PhD program when I was seeking my PhD in counseling psychology. I completed a practicum at a maximum security prison. And I remember being back in the office after engaging with one of the inmates there. And I did a debrief with my supervisor. And I remember that I felt comfortable. It was a lax environment back in the office. And most of the team there was white. I think I used a slang term. I think I said, like, that's what's up or something like that. Just being myself. And I remember she said, hey, Ryan, don't use inmate language. And that always stands out to me because right then and there, I
Wow.
recognized that I did not belong. I
Wow.
recognized that I could not be my true self, right? And use the language that I would normally use in that professional setting because I'll be looked at again as a criminal, right?
Right.
The patient population, unfortunately, was 90% Black males.
Right.
So I also was viewed and perceived maybe as an inmate, right? If I use their type of
Right.
language, in the office setting. So that always stands out to me, right? Because right then and there, I recognized I had to make that conscious switch if I want to be accepted within the workplace.
I'm still rocked by that phrase. Don't use inmate language.
Hmm.
And that was just you talking.
Yes.
Wow.
Hmm.
Wow. That I was not ready for that. Don't use inmate language.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a time where you felt like you took off your mask? Because it feels like there's a mask that we wear in some of these spaces. Was there ever a time where you felt like you had to take off the mask, and what happened and what did you learn from it?
I'm learning to take off that mask just because now I work for myself. And there's a sense of empowerment.
So there is no mask.
There's no mask, right? I choose my clients if they
Right.
don't choose me back, right?
Right.
And I feel empowered in that, but I always didn't feel that. So I started my career as a military psychologist. I worked in the United States Air Force a day. When I put on the uniform, right, people would call me Captain Warner and Major Warner. I was looked at as this leader, right? And I obviously had to abide by the protocols,
Right.
and with that it comes a level of code switching, right? But now again, I don't feel that as much just because my circumstances have changed. But that can be exhausting, right? It led to a lot of anxiety. It led to self-doubt. Doing a lot of research in this area, right, that has a significant impact when it comes to our mental well-being. So I think this is not talked about enough. And there's a lot of individuals listening to this podcast that can relate to that feeling.
So there's recent data that suggests that Black professionals report significantly higher levels of workplace vigilance, that constant state of alertness to discrimination. How does that research show up and impact Black fathers specifically?
Hmm. So that's a powerful question, right? Because so I have two daughters and a 4-year-old, a 3-year-old son. We just turned 4 actually yesterday. And when I think about the challenges I've experienced, as a black male throughout my academic experiences as well as in the workplace. I really don't want my son, a
Right.
black male, to also go through the same thing I went through. I've been called an N-word to my face
Right.
before. I've
At
been
work.
no in a campus
Okay.
environment, white institution.
Same here.
I've been tackled by the police for
Oh,
no
wow.
reason, slammed on the ground, handcuffed
Wow.
for being out at night and being black and looking quote unquote suspicious, right? I've been pulled over for no apparent reason, right? So when I look at my experiences, I don't want that trauma to be perpetuated
Hmm.
unto my son, who's a black male navigating in this divisive world, right? So that creates additional anxiety in me as a father,
Hmm.
not just going through those experiences myself, but wanting better for my children.
So I hear those experiences, some of which I share. The question that comes up is what usually comes up in some of the comments when videos of those kinds of interactions go online. It's, well, you didn't fight, you didn't argue, and hence you are here to tell the story. So isn't that great? Doesn't that show that the system works? That the police were here trying to protect you and protect the community? How would you respond to that?
Well, there's a lot of bias that is not often being addressed when people make those statements. So going back, I went to University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign for my bachelor's degree, and I remember it was maybe I think freshman year, and I remember just hanging around. It was late at night, but me and my friends, we were all black males. We all are black males, and we weren't doing anything wrong. We were just out late at night, doing what college kids do. And I remember that there was a group of white males
Mm-hmm.
and they were all drunk and they jumped on a car.
Mm-hmm.
And a neighbor called the police. They're a group of boys being reckless and jumping on cars. And I remember the police pulled up and then the white boys, they just ran away. And the police came right up to us and they were like, I heard there are boys jumping on the car. And I was like, well, that's not us. We were just out
Mm-hmm.
here standing around, right? We're not doing anything wrong. That bias, right? I
Mm.
saw kicked in, because they assumed it had to be
It
us
had to be
because we were
you.
black males out late in this neighborhood, right? So I think oftentimes when we think about security and safety, right, we don't recognize that all of us have certain biases, right?
Yeah.
Who looks like a criminal? When you think
Yeah.
about a criminal, what's the first image that comes in your mind?
Yeah.
Right? When you think about someone who's successful, a banker, a leader, a Fortune 500 CEO, what person comes to mind,
Yeah.
right? So the biases then take over and influence, how we interact with others, right? So I think we often bring that to light as well if we're talking about this.
I'm not sure how much you've heard about John Henryanism, that as black people, as black men, you have to work umpteenth times harder and be significantly better than your counterparts, your other race counterparts, to get similar or slightly less than what they get. Black men are about 40% more likely to be perceived as angry or aggressive when expressing normal workplace concerns.
Mhm.
And in the story that you shared from college, I was thinking, what would it look like if you and your friends had taken off running in the other direction? What would have been the police's response?
Well, we did, and that was
Okay.
my my experience of being
Oh,
tackled to the ground and
right.
handcuffed. Yes,
So the group of white boys were not pursued,
no,
but the group of black boys obviously were up to no good, so they were pursued.
yep. So what happens? The police pulled up. The white boys they ran away. Police came straight to us and then started questioning us. Put their hand near their weapon, and that's when we all took off. And next thing you know, I'm running down the alley. I turn around and I just get tackled to the ground. And police yells at me like, "That was so stupid. Why did you run away? That was so dumb. You're so stupid." And then handcuffed me and interrogated us for about an hour. Yeah.
Wow.
So.
Wow. Yeah, I'm not. that is. That is. So we know what the situation looks like, whether it's in the streets or in the halls or it's in business offices. Let's talk a little bit about some strategies for resilience. You've developed a number of strategies. Talk to us about some things that black men can do or some strategies that you can offer black fathers in the workplace.
Well, first is try to establish meaningful connections with others. At Marquette University, where I sought my PhD in counseling psychology, I started a group on campus called Men to Men. I started that group because I recognized there were not a lot of men on campus who identified as people of color. I felt alone and isolated at times. And this group brought us together. We were able to be vulnerable. We were able to talk about our particular challenges. And as it gained in popularity, the university actually started to fund this group. We actually had money for pizza, and we were able to get food, and we were able to come together once a month. Around this table was a group of educated Black men, and we were tearful. We were crying. We were laughing, right? We were expressing our frustration about our unique experiences on this college campus. And that was so powerful, right? And it made me recognize that establishing that meaningful connection with others, is essential to buffer against that stress that we experience. So I would say number one, either obtain a mentor or a support group so you don't feel alone in your particular experiences. And that's a powerful way to boost resilience. Number two, being able to identify your particular strengths and attach that with your why and your purpose. What is the purpose and the why of you engaging in whatever type of work that you're doing? What is the bigger purpose? Maybe it's to create, generational wealth. Maybe it's to make a difference in the world and make your mark, that you're here to engage in. Maybe, it's making the workplace a place that is able to ensure that everyone feels that they can thrive and that they belong. Whatever that why is for you, continue to reflect on that in an intentional, conscious way. And that's going to motivate you to push through the various barriers that you engage in. Those are I think, two strategies that come to mind that's helped me, being able to seek social support as well as reflect on that intrinsic motivation has helped me become resilient through my experiences.
So I know we talk about connecting and opening up and engaging with other people. That can both be powerful, means that because you're open and you're connecting with more people, it can also open you to more risk. I think that's a space that fathers sometimes have challenges navigating, that we're always waiting for that risk. We're in that space of hypervigilance coming from our own experience in our environment. We bring that into our work environments. As a Black man, as a father who's entering these workspaces and trying to engage and create community, I'm doing that in a mindful but also very careful way. What are some boundaries that you found essential for protecting your mental health and your space as a Black father and professional?
Yes, definitely. So there has to be a sense of psychological safety before you can open up and be vulnerable. Right. By no means am I saying go to the workplace, talk to your supervisor, and just open up, right? Because that may not be safe. That may be thrown back in your face. I can recall times in which I was very vulnerable in various webinars and trainings that I presented on. I was a keynote speaker, and it came back to bite me. I can recall this training for this huge organization. I'm not going to name the name of it,
Right.
but I trained over 5,000 people at one time. It was a webinar across the country. And I remember months later, my supervisor, I was in the military then, my supervisor called me at like 9 p.m. and he said, Ryan, I want you to turn on the TV right now, turn on the Fox News. I turned on the Fox News and I was on Tucker Carlson's show.
You're kidding. Congratulations.
Yeah. So if anyone knows Tucker Carlson, he's a fine guy, right? A really nice guy. And ultimately, he was saying, yeah, Captain Warner, a military psychologist, is saying these microaggressions, discrimination exists within the armed forces. And I can't believe he's saying these stupid things, right? Discrimination, that this is not really a reality. This is all in his head, right? And, started to gaslight me, on national TV. And then I started to get death threats. I started to, people DM me on social media, right? And ultimately, I recognize that it's not safe sometimes being vulnerable, right, and being open, and telling your experience, even though it's backed in research, right, even though it's backed in statistics. You have to be mindful of, is this a psychologically safe space for me to
Right.
open up to? Can I trust this individual who I'm going to? Right. I think that's essential.
While for most of us it might not be getting gaslighted by Tucker Carlson on Fox News, our supervisors, our
Mhm.
CEOs, our organization leaders, or even maybe just our colleagues might gaslight us, might respond to us, maybe not the might not respond to our vulnerability, or
Mm.
might not see our attempt at engaging in vulnerability in the same way that we were hoping or that we were intending that they were going to experience it.
Correct. And what often happens is micro invalidations is a
Talk to us
sub
about that.
form of microaggressions.
Mm-hmm.
So if I come to you and say, I want to be vulnerable right now, I
Right.
feel, I'm experiencing discrimination, right? And maybe I'm talking to a white woman who's my
Mm-hmm.
supervisor. And then they come back and say, well, me as a white woman, I'm a woman, so I experience the same type of discrimination. That
Mm-hmm.
right there could be a micro invalidation. You're trying to compare various quote unquote minority statuses, right? Saying that we both experience the same thing. And that's a very common form. That's actually the most popular form of microaggressions that happen
Mm-hmm.
within the workplace is micro invalidations, right? So in turn, I don't feel heard. I don't feel, that you truly are trying to empathize with me or see my perspective because you're trying to compare your experiences, right? So that may commonly come up when you engage in vulnerability in the workplace.
So what so in that situation, what would have been the more appropriate, more humane response from my supervisor?
So first, we know that recognizing and celebrating difference
Mm-hmm.
actually brings us stronger together.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oftentimes we take a colorblind approach. I don't see race. I treat everybody the same. Right? Everybody's equal. But the fact is, no, we do see color. We do see various components of identity, right? Facets of identity that come up. So instead, it would have been more helpful to acknowledge that difference.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I identify as a white woman. I don't know what it feels like to be a black man, right? But I hear your perspective, right? I'm here to support you. That right there, you acknowledge that difference. And in turn, that can build that rapport and that trust.
So I often hear people say this kind of the response that you're suggesting, and it sometimes rings hollow to me. It sounds like people have trained really well to say the right things, but it feels like a cold, wet sandwich.
Hmm.
It's just not palatable. It's not very. I don't receive it as warm. It just feels like you're saying what you think person in your position should, but I don't get that sense or that feeling from you that there's this deep level of empathy or that you're even really listening to my situation.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So the superficial
Yeah.
type of interventions we've seen a lot, especially in the killing of George Floyd. Right now, everybody comes out the woodworks and say, "Oh yeah, that's so unfortunate that you went through that. I feel so bad." Right, and then there's this sense of pity, I guess.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I've had random people text me that I haven't talked to in years, and then once George Floyd got killed, they start texting me. I can't believe you have to experience this as a black male. I'm like,
Yeah.
this is nothing new.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just now getting the media attention. So and then after that, you never heard from them again, right? So these superficial type of interventions that we've seen this happen when it comes to systemic changes, right? Let me
Mm-hmm.
hire DEI professionals and then fire them once we don't care about these interventions anymore, right? Let's talk about this, have courageous conversations.
Mm-hmm.
But then years later, we don't continue it, right? Change and progress isn't really measured, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that ultimately does not feel genuine.
Yeah. Let's talk organizational responsibility. What kind of specific changes do you believe that organizations need to make to better support Black fathers or Black men's mental health?
So I think there's various changes. First, number one, interpersonally, and also number two, systemically. So interpersonally, what type of conversations are being had? Do the workplaces even recognize the unique barriers and challenges that this group faces? Okay. How is that being brought up in meetings? How Are there safe spaces to have these discussions? Are there resources, support groups, educational material being disseminated and provided to this particular group, right? So you have to look interpersonally. And then systemically, right, what are some policies, practices, or procedures in place, right? So, for instance, we know that when a child gets born, there's policies that say the mother gets X amount of time off and the father gets X amount of time off as well. Me and my wife, we experienced this particular challenge. We both are working parents. There was times in which we have our own businesses, right? So we don't get any PTO or anything like that.
Right.
And there was times in which when she took some time off, I needed to, at the time I had my own business and I was working in the military. And I needed to take time off the military so I can go and support her at home, but I didn't receive that time. So it's just like those various challenges now that put on additional stress on my wife that she had to take care of our children, taking the doctor's visits, etc. I was trying to balance that. So being able to ensure that there's different policies and practices, in place to support this group, I think is essential. Little things like, do the bathrooms have, diaper changing stations? Me and my wife, we literally went to a restaurant last month and I took my 11-month-old into the men's bathroom and there was no place to change the diaper. So I said, hey, you're going to have to stand up. Okay, I'm going to bend down and I have to change you standing up, right? So even in this day and age, 2025, there's still bathrooms out there, men's bathrooms that don't have diaper changing stations. So looking at the environment, the system, as well as interpersonal factors, that's going to be essential with best supporting this group.
So I know that the idea that you still have men's rooms that don't have changing tables continues to suggest that fathers are not engaged, should not be engaged in childcare. That to me, that is the message and the belief system. And so, how do we change that? I'm also thinking about the workplace, the space for colleagues to better support Black fathers in the workspace. Again, kind of talking about that cosmetic engagement. People put up flags on their doors or that say, I'm an ally or I'm a this or I'm a that. And sometimes that just feels like little medals we give ourselves. What exactly should an ally be doing? How can allies be supporting Black fathers if they really are allies?
So I think it comes with the action and also the genuine, authentic approach. Are you an ally because it sounds good, or is this connected to, what you really value? Yeah, I think so. There's an interpersonal approach that needs to be taken when you quote unquote claim if you're an ally or not. Okay. Once you identify that why, that driving force, then look at your behaviors and your actions. Right. In the last week, if I look back at my behaviors, did I support a Black male or a Black father in a certain way? Being able to look at that. And then thirdly, how are you advocating for this particular group? Right. Maybe you hold a certain position of power or privilege, and maybe you can leverage that power to ultimately influence systemic change. Maybe you serve in a leadership role in the workplace and can bring these issues to the attention of others so that we can all come together to support this group. Maybe you can use your voice and say, if we support Black men and Black fathers, then everyone thrives. We have to recognize that we're not just supporting this group only, right? We recognize that we support this group, then guess what? They're going to perform better. We're going to come together better as a team. That's going to enhance our team dynamics, right? And we're going to be able to achieve whatever mission and vision that we're working for, right? So being able to look at, the full picture of this, being able to leverage your power and your privilege, and also use a genuine, authentic approach, I think is essential. Okay.
Yeah. So if you could talk to us a little bit about your own weekend morning reflections or other times where you sit and intentionally engage in reflection practices and how that has transformed your approach both as a father and as a professional.
So I have a book right next to me titled Brilliant Ideas. And in this book, I write down all my goals, ambitions, short-term goals, monthly goals, quarterly goals. And I have a section for business and I have a section for personal. So the business is like, what's the impact I want to make, right? And the personal is, how can I continue to be present, right? One personal goal I have is I'm going to take my son on just a solo date, just me and him, and we're going to go to SeaWorld. So we're going to drive to SeaWorld, it's about 2 hours away. And, we're going to spend the night in a nice hotel, and he's going to go and see all the animals, right? Mm-hmm. And that's really important to me because now that we have 3 children in total, right, I don't really spend a lot of just one-on-one time with my oldest son, right? So being able to be intentional about that, write that down, reflect on it, is something that I do. So I think just continue to be intentional and deliberate with spending that quality time, being present when I do spend time with my children is one thing that often comes up in my reflection. That's what I do to ensure that I'm meeting my professional goals as well as my personal goals.
And so as we pull this to a close, for the fathers who are listening to you, those who are in business spaces, those who are in regular day-to-day workplaces, what are some pieces of advice that you would leave with them?
So the piece of advice would be identify what is your legacy, both personal legacy and professional legacy. Oftentimes we think of legacy, depending how we operate, we may directly go to professional. Well, professionally, I want to make X amount of money. Right. I want to work with X amount of organizations, right? But then how's that also connected with your personal legacy, right? The legacy that you're going to leave your children, the legacy when it comes to just interacting with people day to day in society, being able to support and interact with family, right? So being able to just identify what's the mark you want to leave in this world, I think is a powerful reflection, right? And oftentimes it may be intertwined, right, with your personal and your professional. I know for me, I just want to make the biggest impact possible in my professional life and my personal life. I want to be able to create generational wealth. I want to be able to provide values to my children so they can be better than me, and the next generation continue to advance and thrive, right? So that's connected to everything I do in my personal life and my professional life. So I challenge everyone to just reflect on that and then look back at your actions and say, do my actions and behaviors align with that particular goal? And if it doesn't, then try to make those shifts.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ryan Warner. It was a pleasure having this conversation with you. I look forward to continuing to remain engaged and in touch with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to the Black Father's Pulse. I'm your host, Dr. Alvin Thomas. I'm a clinical psychologist, researcher, and director of the TriLab at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Views shared on this podcast are mine or that of my guest and are not associated with the university. Original music for our series was composed and performed by Micaiah De Silva, artwork by Isabella Acra. The podcast is produced by me and is supported by the kind contributions of you, the public, and advertisers. Follow me on Twitter at Dr_AT758, that's Dr_AT758, or the Black Father's Pulse podcast on Instagram and YouTube. Subscribe to the Black Father's Pulse podcast wherever you do your podcast listening, and don't forget to share and leave us a positive review.